Imagine a world where uh, advanced artificial intelligence knows your hidden health risks, your impulse buying habits, and your deepest anxieties.
Right.
And it does all this without ever actually looking at a single file with your name on it. It just infers it perfectly from anonymized patterns.
Yeah, that's the reality we're moving toward.
Exactly. So if we are already hurtling toward that future, is the very idea of, checking a box to give explicit consent for your data already totally obsolete?
I mean, that is easily the defining regulatory question of our time. And it's exactly the collision course the world is currently on.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because today, whether you are prepping for a crucial exam, a strategic policy meeting, or you just want to understand the invisible architecture of your digital life, this deep dive is your ultimate war room briefing.
Absolutely.
We are looking at India undergoing this massive digital governance overhaul. The government is essentially tearing down the archaic digital rules of the past 2 decades and building an entirely new ecosystem.
Completely new foundation.
Yeah, right. So our source material today is a comprehensive briefing on the Digital India Act and its cornerstone, the Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023.
What everyone in the industry just calls the DPDP Act.
DPDP Act, right. But we're not just going to read legal clauses today. Our mission is to extract the analytical frameworks, the structural problems being solved, and the strategic implications for India. So let's dive into the background layer. Why the sudden, urgent rush to rewrite the entire digital playbook right now?
Well, to put it bluntly, the old playbook was written for a world that just no longer exists. Until this recent overhaul, India's primary governing framework was the Information Technology Act of 2000.
Wow, 2000.
Yeah, think back to the year 2000.
I mean, dial-up modems. People were playing Snake on Nokia brick phones.
Exactly.
Oh,
Social media wasn't really a thing, and the concept of a multi-billion-dollar data economy sounded like, well, science fiction.
right.
And you simply cannot regulate today's algorithmic AI-driven digital landscape with laws designed for the dial-up era.
Makes sense.
The government realized that a piecemeal approach, just patching old laws year after year was failing. So the new Digital India Bill isn't just one single law. It's an overarching framework.
It's an umbrella.
Exactly. It houses the DPDP Act for personal privacy, but also incorporates things like the Indian Telecom Bill to modernize physical infrastructure and policies for non-personal data governance.
So things like anonymized city traffic patterns or crop yield statistics.
Come on.
What really stands out to me in the source material isn't just the new rules, but the completely different philosophy behind how they are written. Instead of maintaining this rigid, hyper-specific IT perspective, the new bill operates on broad principles.
Right. It's a structural shift.
It sets core objectives like ensure an open and safe internet, protect user rights, reduce online risks, accelerate tech innovation, and then it essentially tells companies, evaluate your actions based on these core objectives.
And that is a fundamental shift from a prescriptive regulatory model to a principles-based one. Because when a government tries to write a law outlining every single specific technological interaction,
It's outdated immediately.
yes, the law is obsolete the moment the ink dries. Technology just moves too fast.
So instead of trying to write a specific traffic rule for every single new type of flying car that might be invented tomorrow, the government is basically building an entirely new smart city grid based on core safety principles.
I love that analogy.
They're just saying, we don't care exactly how your new vehicle works, just don't hit the pedestrians.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. If we look at India's digital trajectory, the earlier phases over the last decade were all about capability demonstration.
Like laying fiber optics and building payment stacks.
Right, getting 1 billion people online.
Oh.
This new framework represents a shift to regulatory maturity. It's the state attempting to harness the immense economic good of new tech while setting up foundational guardrails to limit potential harm.
But broad principles are only as good as their practical execution. And the most critical pillar of this entire architecture, the one actually passed in 2023, is the DPDP Act. So let's look at how this functions when you, the user, actually interact with the screen.
The facts and data memory layer, essentially.
Exactly. The law establishes two main players using some very specific legal vocabulary you need to remember. The entities that collect data are called data fiduciaries.
And the everyday users, you and me, are the data principals.
Data principles, right. And the absolute bedrock of this dynamic is consent. Fiduciaries cannot process your personal data without your explicit, clear consent.
And that consent architecture isn't just a basic I agree button buried at the bottom of a 50-page legal document anymore.
Written in totally confusing jargon.
Right. The law demands it be in simple language, stating the exact specific purpose for the data collection.
Wait, so if a food delivery app collects my GPS location to drop off a pizza, they can't suddenly turn around and sell that location history to an advertising firm.
Not without asking you for fresh, explicit consent for that entirely new purpose. Plus, the law places strict, ongoing obligations on the company.
Like what?
They must maintain the accuracy of the data, keep it secure, and crucially, they must delete it once the original purpose has been met.
That deletion mandate is massive. Users suddenly have serious, actionable rights. The sources highlight that you can nominate someone else to manage your data, you can demand deletion, and you can withdraw your consent at any time.
Though it is important to note that any costs or consequences of withdrawing consent are borne by the user.
Meaning, if you withdraw your consent for the ride-sharing app to see your location, you can't complain when the driver can't find your house.
Precisely. It puts the agency and the responsibility back in the hands of the data principal.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. A major logistical hurdle jumped out at me from the text regarding the territorial scope. The law obviously applies to data processing within India's borders.
Yeah.
But it also explicitly states it applies outside India if the processing involves offering goods and services or profiling individuals inside India.
The extraterritorial reach.
Yes. Let's make this concrete. Imagine a mobile gaming company based in Helsinki, Finland. They don't have a single office or employee in India. But a teenager in Mumbai is playing their game on a smartphone and buying virtual skins. Under this law, that server in Helsinki is suddenly bound by Indian regulations.
Is.
How does a domestic law enforce rules on a server sitting halfway across the world?
That question right there is the essence of modern digital sovereignty. But anchoring the jurisdiction to where the user is located, rather than where the corporate server physically sits, India is leveraging its global market power.
But practically speaking, how do you police a company in Finland?
You police it through market access. If that Helsinki gaming company wants access to one of the largest and fastest growing digital consumer bases on the planet, they have to comply with Indian data laws.
Ah, I see.
If they refuse, the Indian government can ultimately block their digital access to the Indian network entirely. It ensures foreign tech giants can't just bypass local laws by moving their data centers offshore.
And speaking of offshore, the framework tackles cross-border data transfers in a very specific way. It adopts a blacklisting approach rather than a whitelisting one.
Yes, and the distinction is vital for how global trade functions. A whitelisting approach means the government publishes a narrow list of approved countries you are allowed to send data to.
Which sounds highly restrictive.
It is. It creates huge bottlenecks. Blacklisting, on the other hand, means you can send data anywhere in the world by default, unless the government specifically names a region as restricted.
Like hostile or insecure territory.
Exactly. It's much more flexible for multinational businesses while still protecting national interests.
It sounds great for massive corporations, but things get extremely complicated when we look at the strict rules around children. The DPDP Act sets the age of a child strictly at 18.
A hard line at 18, yes.
If a company wants to process the data of anyone under 18, or a person with disabilities who has a legal guardian, they need verifiable consent from the parent or guardian. Plus, tracking and behavioral monitoring of children is almost entirely prohibited.
Which is a noble goal.
I see the intent, totally. Protect kids. But functionally, how does a platform even know someone is under 18 without collecting more intrusive data to verify their identity?
It is a massive paradox in privacy law worldwide. To prove you aren't collecting data on a minor, you might have to collect a government ID or biometrics from every single user just to verify their age.
Which defeats the purpose of privacy.
It creates an enormous compliance burden. The tech industry is scrambling right now to develop new cryptographic tools, like zero-knowledge proofs, to verify age mathematically without storing identity documents.
And this disproportionately hurts domestic startups. I was reading through the critical evaluation layer in our sources, the stakeholder pushback, and startups are sounding the alarm.
Oh, absolutely.
Implementing this kind of complex, verifiable consent architecture costs an absolute fortune. Policy experts were reportedly shocked that the final law doesn't include any broad provision for deemed consent.
Right. And deemed consent is a legal mechanism where in certain low-risk everyday situations, your consent is essentially assumed without needing a formal digital signature or explicit agreement.
Like, if I willingly hand my business card to someone at a conference, there should be deemed consent for them to email me. I shouldn't have to sign a privacy waiver first.
Exactly.
Because the Act lacks a broad deemed consent provision for corporate use, it forces a tiny bootstrap app developer in Bangalore to build the exact same massive, expensive compliance infrastructure as a Silicon Valley tech behemoth.
Which creates a fascinating tension.
Yeah.
The overarching Digital India framework states that one of its primary goals is accelerating tech innovation.
Mm.
But a rigid, expensive consent architecture risks creating an insurmountable barrier to entry. If only established, trillion-dollar monopolies can afford the legal and technical costs to comply, you accidentally stifle the very startup innovation you're trying to promote.
And that innovation bottleneck gets even tighter when we talk about artificial intelligence. This is perhaps the biggest flashpoint in the source material.
The public data issue.
Yes. The DPDP Act explicitly states that its protections do not apply to personal data that has been voluntarily put into the public domain by the user. On the surface, that sounds like it gives AI companies a free pass to scrape public data, right?
Actually, the nuance there is critical, and it's causing a lot of anxiety in the tech sector.
How so?
Well, the wording can be interpreted to mean that while the user gives up certain privacy rights by posting publicly, the strict obligations on the data fiduciary might still apply if they pull that data to build profiles or train algorithmic models.
Oh, wow.
Or conversely, if the personal data wasn't put there voluntarily by the user, say, a news article written about them, can an AI legally scrape it?
Wait, if generative AI models or local Indian equivalents to things like ChatGPT need to ingest vast oceans of internet text to learn how to speak and reason, and they are restricted from processing personal data that happens to be organically mixed into that public web scrape, how do they even function?
They struggle.
You cannot manually filter out every single name, email, or phone number from a billion-page dataset before feeding it to an AI. Doesn't that put Indian tech at a massive disadvantage globally?
This raises an important question, and you've hit on the central conflict between individual privacy and technological advancement. AI models require absolute scale.
Right.
If domestic AI developers face legal jeopardy or massive fines for accidentally processing personal data scraped from a public blog post,
Yeah.
they're going to fall significantly behind. They'll be competing against models developed in jurisdictions with much looser data scraping regulations. It's a genuine, unresolved technological gap.
But privacy isn't just about protecting us from tech companies or AI. It's also about our relationship with the state. And the sources make it clear no fundamental right is absolute.
True.
So when does the government's interest override my individual right to digital privacy?
Well, the Act outlines several specific exemptions where explicit user consent is legally bypassed. These include responding to medical emergencies, managing epidemics, or national security incidents like terror acts.
Okay, that makes practical sense. If there's a devastating earthquake, you don't want rescue workers waiting for a digital consent form to be signed before they can access a missing person's cell phone location.
Exactly. The government can also process data without asking you in order to fulfill legal obligations or comply with court judgments.
But the broader powers given to the sender really caught my eye. The central government retains the right to exempt any instrumentality of the state from the provisions of this law.
Yes, sweeping powers.
And the justifications for doing so are incredibly broad, like national security, relations with foreign governments, or the maintenance of public order. So privacy is a fundamental right, but treated much like free speech, subject to reasonable restrictions.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the classic perpetual tension between national security and individual liberty. The phrase sovereignty and integrity of India gives intelligence and law enforcement agencies very wide latitude.
Huge latitude.
The argument from the state is agility. In a rapidly unfolding crisis, you cannot be bogged down by privacy compliance.
Sure, but critics in the civil society space argue that without independent oversight, exempting government agencies from privacy rules effectively legalizes mass surveillance.
And that friction extends directly to the Right to Information Act, the RTI.
Yes, the sources specifically mention a clash here. Journalists and activists use the RTI to expose corruption by demanding government records. But if the DPDP Act strongly protects the personal data of government functionaries, there is a real fear that corrupt officials could just claim privacy to block RTI requests from the public.
The government says they have harmonized the two laws, but the anxiety among transparency advocates is definitely palpable.
It all comes down to who is actually enforcing these rules and holding both the state and the private sector accountable.
Exactly, the enforcement mechanism.
Right, let's talk about the teeth of this law. If a company ignores all of this, if they scrape data, ignore consent, and fail to protect user information, who actually drops the hammer?
The enforcer is a new institution called the Data Protection Board, or the DPB.
But instantly there is controversy because the center retains control over appointing its members. Critics argue it lacks true independence. Regardless of how independent they are, though, their powers are staggering.
Very robust powers, yes.
They can summon executives under oath, inspect company books, and if a platform breaches the rules more than twice, the DPB can advise the government to just block public access to that app entirely.
That is the ultimate kill switch.
Oh,
But the day-to-day enforcement relies heavily on financial governance. The penalties structured in this act are astronomical.
astronomical is putting it mildly. Fines can reach up to Rs 250 crore just for failing to protect personal data, or even for failing to inform the DPB that a breach happened.
And the maximum penalty capped at Rs 500 crore for combined breaches.
But here's the detail that truly shocked me. The new law completely eliminates criminal penalties. In older drafts of this bill, executives could literally go to jail for data violations. Now, you might pay a 500 crore fine, but absolutely no one is sitting behind bars.
It's a huge shift.
Why let corporate executives off the hook like that?
It might look like a massive concession to corporations, but it is a highly calculated strategic move centered on the ease of doing business framework. We have to look at the reality of modern cybersecurity.
Okay, lay it out for me.
Breaches sometimes happen despite a company doing absolutely everything right. They could be targeted by sophisticated state-sponsored hackers or hit by what the industry calls zero-day exploits.
Let's clarify that. A zero-day exploit is basically an undiscovered flaw in a software's code that hackers find and weaponize before the actual developers even know it exists, right?
Exactly. You cannot punish a CEO with jail time if a foreign intelligence agency uses a weaponized invisible bug to break into their servers.
That makes sense.
If you criminalize corporate behavior in the tech sector, you create an environment of sheer panic. Executives would refuse to report breaches out of fear of prison, and global investors would flee the market.
So it's about the business environment.
Right. By removing jail time but imposing existential 500 crore financial deterrence, the state is trying to build a culture of compliance and transparency rather than a culture of cover-ups. They want companies to invest heavily in security without terrifying the talent pool away.
That is a fascinating way to balance the scales. So what does this all mean for you, the listener, who needs to distill this into a winning argument for an exam or a policy memo?
Let's run through the synthesis and way forward framework. You need to structure this systematically. First, the context. We are transitioning from the dial-up era IT Act 2000 to the DPDP 2023 for a modern digital India.
Got it.
Second, the dimensions. Focus on extraterritorial reach, data fiduciary obligations, principal rights, and the blacklisting of data regions. Third, the challenges.
Like the lack of deemed consent hitting startups.
Exactly. Startup compliance costs, the RTI friction, and the AI public data bottlenecks. Fourth, the recommendations or the way forward. You need to argue for institutional strengthening, meaning ensuring the DPB's independence.
Right.
Also, technology adoption to lower startup compliance costs and regulatory fine-tuning for AI data processing.
Perfect. Give us the final revision anchors. What are the 5 must-remember facts?
Number 1, it replaces the IT Act 2000. Number 2, a maximum penalty of RCS 500 crore, but no jail time. Number 3, child age is strictly set at 18. Number 4, it excludes public domain data, though AI scraping remains a gray area. And number 5, the government holds broad exemption powers.
And the analytical keywords to drop in your answers.
Data fiduciary, consent architecture, extraterritoriality, deemed consent, and principle-based regulation.
That is an incredible war room breakdown. So stepping back, we see this overarching theme, the painful, messy, but absolutely necessary transition from rapid expansion to mature governance. For 20 years, the goal was simply getting India online. Now it's about securing the perimeter.
The true success of this law won't be judged by the text passed in 2023, but by how the Data Protection Board handles its very first major enforcement case.
How they interpret the gray areas. Because as we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive, the gray areas are only getting wider. We are building massive legal structures based entirely on the concept of explicit user consent, checking a box, reading a policy.
Right.
But as generative AI becomes capable of predicting our deepest vulnerabilities using nothing but macro-level anonymized behavioral data, is the very concept of consent already becoming obsolete. The law as it stands is a monumental achievement, but technology will inevitably force us to rewrite the rulebook again.
It always does.
And when it does, we'll be here to unpack it. You now have the analytical framework, the core mechanics, and the strategic friction points to fully master the Digital India Act. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.